everyone. We are talking more about soap tonight. And tonight's topic is what can you add to your soap? People ask me all the time, can I add XYZ to my soap? And if you've been around me for very long, you'll know the answer a lot of times is it depends. It really depends on what is your goal? I know your goal is probably to have soap that looks pretty, doesn't mold, and actually works. And so that would be why you wouldn't add some things. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it's also not going to be what you think it's going to be. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of exactly what I am talking about. A lot of times people think, well, if you can eat it, it's safe, so you can put it in soap. However, that's not necessarily true, because when you put it in your soap, it'll be subjected to a lot of things. It's going to be subjected to lye, which has a very high pH, and that's going to affect it. It's also going to be affected to high temperature, which is also going to affect it. And so it could make your soap mold or seize, or it just might be really ugly. One of the things I know a lot of people want to talk about wanting to put lavender buds in their soap. And you may, if you've seen soap before, you've probably noticed that they don't usually have lavender buds in the soap. They're on one edge of the soap, and the reason for that is because if you put lavender buds in the soap itself, it would cook them during the saponification process. Between the pH of the lye and the temperature that your soap gets up to during saponification, it would basically cook them. When I was getting started, I met a lady who did that, and she said it looked like there were little brown bugs in her soap instead of beautiful purple flowers. So she recommended that I not try that. And I decided I would learn from her mistake and not try that. So we will talk some more about herbs, honey, milk, and some other popular ingredients that may or may not be a good idea to add to your soap. So the only time I personally ever had a really big problem with an additive was when I tried to add honey, because honey, you see people all the time talking about how honey is good for your skin, and lotion with honey, soap with honey. So, and I thought, because I was making it with goat milk, so let's make milk and honey. So that'll be wonderful, right? And what I actually wound up with was this amazing thing called tunneling, because both milk and honey have sugar in them, and the addition of sugar to the lye causes the whole mixture to heat up even more than it does normally. And so it was very interesting, because normally, your soap mixture just sits in your mold completely flat for the whole saponification process. And I noticed it was rising like a cake. And interestingly enough, it never fell. I thought that it would fall at some point. It did not fall. And then when I sliced it, there was a hole. It was a tunnel that went all the way through the whole loaf. And so every single bar had a hole in the middle of it. And the lady who taught me to make soap said, first of all, she said I used too much honey, which I think I only used a quarter cup, which did not seem like very much. She's like, oh no, you can only use a tablespoon or two. But the other thing she said was that I could buy some ropes and stick the rope through there and sell it as soap on a rope, or get some gold mica and use a paintbrush to paint the middle and call it tunnel of gold soap. So you could tell she'd been selling soap for a while. So she had some very creative ideas for how to deal with that soap and how to sell it instead of having to rebatch it, or, just have the family use it. So anyway, just because you have something that doesn't turn out quite the way you planned doesn't mean it's a complete waste. So whenever you add anything to the soap, it's going to affect the texture, it can affect the color, it can affect the scent, and it can also affect the shelf life. usually, if it's going to affect it one way or the other, you can usually shorten the shelf life. So it's very important to keep all of that in mind as you are adding things. So I just checked the comments and see that somebody is asking a question about a weather with a cough. If you guys have questions about anything other than soap, if you could message us on our website, like if you go to the Thrifty Homesteader website, actually, if you go to the Thrifty Homesteader website and look up whatever topic, like for a cough, look up pneumonia, read that, and then post in the comment section below and we'll answer you on there. Because everybody showed up to hear a talk about soap tonight. So we want to stick to that topic, and we will be happy to help you on our website or on Facebook messaging or Instagram messaging. So the first thing I want to talk about is colors, because that's one thing a lot of people want to make pretty soap. And I know I did too in the beginning. I don't really care anymore. I quit using colorants after my first, after the first couple years, because it just wasn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. So if you want to color your soap like pink, blue, purple, something like that, what you need to use are oxides or ultramarines that are specifically made for soap. You don't want to use something like food dyes are not going to work. Candle dyes are not safe because candle dyes are not meant to come in contact with skin. So they're not safe. So you need to use, so for your beautiful, bright, vibrant colors, you have to use oxides or ultramarines that are specifically made for soap making. And you get those from soap making companies that are online. Now, there are some natural things that you can use, but they're not, if you want like pretty bright pinks and purples and blues and stuff, and even greens, you're not going to get that. Actually, another mistake that I did make one time was that I read on somebody's website that you could use some kind of an herb. I think it was comfrey. She was like, you use this, it'll make a beautiful green soap. And it did not. It made a puke brown soap. It was so ugly. And there's nothing you could do with a soap that's just that ugly. And so we didn't even try to sell it. The family just used it. It's the same issue. If you want to use dried herbs, you're going to have the same issue as that lady who tried to put lavender buds in her soap. And that is that it's going to get cooked and turn brown. And so you're not going to have any color left in it. Some of a natural color that does work would be like kaolin clay or French green clay or rose clay. And I have definitely made soaps with French green clay and rose clay. And the rose clay is a nice dark pink color. The French green clay is kind of like an avocado green. So, some people may or may not like that, but you're not going to be able to get the pretty bright green or pink or purple that you get with the oxides and the ultramarines. There are some natural colorants that people like to use. I'm not quite sure why anybody would want to have a chocolate colored bar of soap, but if you do, then using cocoa is a possibility because it's completely dry. That's the thing you're going to notice as I'm going through these additives is that when the things that are completely dry are the things that I'm going to give a green light to. The things that still have moisture in them and liquid in them, you don't want to use because that can wind up molding, and that's going to just ruin your soap. So cocoa would be fine if you want something that's that color. Turmeric is one of the only things that will give you like a bright yellow color that will last. One of the things about using a lot of natural colorants is that they fade really fast. So the oxides and ultramarines do not fade. You put that in there, it stays that color forever. But anything botanical is going to fade with time. I have a book back here somewhere. I have a book on natural soap making, and she's got a bunch of pictures in there that show you, like, this is what it looked like when it was unmolded, and this is what it looked like, a month later, and this is 3 months later. And you can see every single one of them fades. Even the cocoa fades and it gets lighter. So I mean, the good news there is that if you use a natural colorant and you don't like it and you think, well, that's too dark, it might look, you might like it in a month or two. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you use things like cocoa and turmeric, and even cocoa butter, you're using those in such a small quantity that it's not going to make your bar actually smell like it. I know I wanted to make a coffee bar many years ago, and I put coffee grounds in there, and I was really disappointed that it didn't smell like coffee. It is completely unscented, because the reality is you don't need a lot of coffee grounds to make it, to give it that texture. So coffee is more of an exfoliant, and it's a really heavy duty exfoliant than a colorant, because you'll have the dark brown speckles in there. Charcoal is another thing that you can use, which also, charcoal is great if you have a teenager that has a problem with oily skin or acne. Adding charcoal, and you can get, I'm not talking about going to the store and buying charcoal for your grill. You actually can get like a powdered charcoal from soap making companies, and you would add that to your soap batter as you're mixing it up. And it turns depending on how much you use, it's going to turn it a light gray to dark gray. You're not going to get a completely black bar of soap though. At least I've never been able to. But I suppose at some point you might, but for the most part, it's going to be gray. You definitely don't want to use, like I said, don't use food dyes, because that's just not going to work. It's going to just disappear. And candle dyes are not skin safe. And most vegetable powders and natural stuff like annatto and stuff is going to fade if it doesn't turn brown. So always make sure that you test new colorants in small batches to make sure that you're going to like it. So if you've got if you've got different recipes for different sizes. In my soap course, all of my recipes are for about 11 bars. So they use 44 ounces of oil, and they can all be doubled. So once you want to start with those smaller batches, and once you get good at that and you like everything, then you can move on to doubling that and creating a bigger batch. So I'm going to see if we've got any questions about colors before I move on. Marge says she met someone that used Kool-Aid for color. Wow, that just reinforces the idea that I should not be drinking Kool-Aid, which I don't. So I'm glad I don't, because if Kool-Aid will color soap, that's one heavy duty kind of a dye. I know people use it for making, for coloring yarn. I have known spinners who dyed their yarn with Kool-Aid, and it makes some very pretty yarn. But again, that just kind of reinforces the idea that this is like a really heavy duty dye, and I don't know that I really want to be drinking something like that. So, all right, back to tonight's topic. So the first thing we had talked about was colors. The next thing we're going to talk about is scents. So a lot of people, the biggest mistake I see with scents is I see people who have gotten into doTERRA or Young Living, and they've been convinced that these are like the most incredibly potent oils in the world, and that they can make a batch of soap with like, 5 drops of essential oil or even 10, and they don't understand why their soap doesn't smell like anything. And the reality is, when you make soap, there's no way that you are going to use something like doTERRA or Young Living, because for that little 44-ounce loaf that makes 11 bars that I teach people in the beginning, that takes 2 ounces of essential oils. Now, if you're buying, I can't even imagine, that could be hundreds of dollars if you wanted to get 2 ounces of doTERRA or Young Living. And that's really, unless you're a millionaire, that is just not worth it for something that's like in contact with your skin for 30 seconds and then gets washed down the drain. So there are a lot of companies online that sell essential oils for soap makers, and they sell them in much larger quantities. They do sell small quantities. So if you're not sure about something, you can buy a small quantity to try it out. But then, like, we buy essential oils by the quart, literally by the quart. Because like we buy lye in 40-pound boxes because we sell soap. And so we buy these things in bulk to make it less expensive. So you definitely want to make sure that you're using enough of an essential oil. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fragrance oils now, because a lot of people don't know the difference between essential oils and fragrance oils. And I've even seen people selling soap that had them incorrectly labeled, like pineapple essential oil and strawberry essential oil. And it's like, there is no strawberry essential oil or pineapple essential oil. And so I don't know if I don't know why they did that, because it's just completely wrong. And there is no essential oil of those things. So like citrus oil comes from the peel of the citrus plant. And so anyway, it's very important to know the difference between essential oils and fragrance oils. Fragrance oils are synthetic, and they are made in a lab. And the whole reason I started making my own soap is because I was allergic to every single soap in the store. They all made me itch and sneeze. And if I ever travel and forget my soap, I very quickly remember why I started making soap, because the soap in the hotels is just horrendous. I initially started out trying to use some fragrance oils, and then I finally just quit because of the negative feedback that I got from customers. I have never gotten a single complaint from anybody who purchased any essential oil soap from me. But I did get complaints from people who purchased fragrance oil soaps. And so, I opened the box and immediately started sneezing, or somebody got a rash and stuff like that. And so there was just no way I was going to continue selling a product like that. It's like, I can't use this. Why am I making it and selling it to people? That's just crazy. So I only use essential oils in my soaps. And but that doesn't mean you can't get creative. In fact, by mixing your essential oils, you can sometimes get them to last longer. Some oils, like citrus oils, if you just put lemon essential oil or orange essential oil or tangerine essential oil into a soap, they don't usually last very long. Like, they take a month to dry, and at the end of that month, they have the lightest scent of any of the soaps on the drying rack. And so I always want to use something else with them. So that's why, like, we'll see in my soap making course that I do things like lemon spearmint So I mix like 50-50 lemon essential oil with spearmint essential oil. That is a fabulous scent. People say it reminds them of the smell of Wrigley's gum. And another one that is that I mix is orange essential oil with cinnamon essential oil. So you get the idea. And this is a pretty well-known fact that when you use a stronger essential oil, that it anchors that weaker essential oil, and just together they last longer than if you had only used the weaker essential oil, which pretty much all the citrus essential oils are very wimpy and tend to fade really fast. So in fact, by 2 months, most of them have no scent. A bar of citrus has no scent at all. And bonus tip, if you sell soap, if you wind up with soap that's like still sitting in inventory and loses its scent, that is a great time to have a sale for people with a discount on the soap if they don't care what the fragrance is. And that way you can move those. It's like, well, they're almost unscented. Like, you don't want to sell them as unscented in case somebody really has a super severe allergy. And plus, it's not honest to say they're unscented if there is essential oil in there. But you also don't want to sell it as like orange or lemon, because they're going to get it and go, I can't smell anything. And then they're going to be unhappy. So I offer people these discounts of like 20% off if you just take whatever I have in inventory that I want to move. And so that's what I do. Let me check. Looks like we've got 4 questions. Marge says that you can also anchor scents with 2% clay. Oh, that's an interesting thought. I haven't seen that written, but I know that I make a soap with pink clay a lot. And I scent it with Lang Lang and grapefruit or lavender. And that scent does last for like a year, because I don't even sell that soap. It's for me. Because Lang Lang essential oil is insanely expensive. Like, there's no way you could sell a bar for what it costs you, but I'll use it for myself. So, and okay. So the next thing is we're going to talk about are exfoliants and decorative additives. So exfoliants are those rough things that basically exfoliate your skin, rub off. In addition to like rubbing off dry skin and dead skin, they also are good for like really dirty hands. Though I used to make a gardener's scrub bar, and it just occurred to me I haven't made that gardener scrub bar in years. I'm not sure how it fell off of our list of soap to make. But the gardener scrub bar, what I would put in there, you can buy pumice. So I did buy pumice for a while, but to make it more homemade, what I used was dried eggshells. And so you only need the eggshells from about 3 or 4 eggs. And after you crack the egg, you rinse out the shell and you let it sit there and dry until it is completely 100% dry. And then you throw it into like a coffee grinder, not the fancy expensive kind, but just the cheap kind with the little blade in there that spins around. And that grinds up the eggshell so that it feels very much like pumice. And that was great for the gardener scrub bar. And your hands are really, really dirty. And so you're scrubbing with that, and it helps to scrub the dirt off. Ground oats are another thing that a lot of people like to add. If you've ever seen, I know you've seen soap that says colloidal oatmeal. That is a super fancy way of just saying ground up oats. So you can grind up your oats, and it's the same thing. You don't need a lot of these things in a batch of soap. that 44 ounces of oil that I was talking about that we use for the small batch of soap. You don't need a lot, just like you don't even need a quarter cup. A couple tablespoons is enough, and you throw it in your coffee grinder, turn it on, and that will grind up your oats for you. I used to make a lemongrass poppy seed soap with the poppy seeds in there. Poppy seeds are kind of weird. Like if you've got poppy seeds in there, they're black and they're very obvious. And as someone is using the soap, they will see a poppy seed falling out now and then and going down their drain. And, some people may be fine with that. Some people may think it's weird, but it's just something to be aware of. So I've already mentioned ground coffee grounds. It's very, very important that if you want to use coffee grounds, that they are dry. Only made that mistake once where I thought, why do they need to dry? The soap is going to dry. Like, why don't I just pulled coffee grounds out of the coffee maker one morning and decided to make soap with them. And that was a huge mistake because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of moisture in there in those coffee grounds, but there is. It was horrible. The bars of soap felt like a sponge, like you could squish it like a sponge, and they never really dried. We didn't sell them because that would not have been good. I like to have repeat customers, and so we didn't sell them. We just used them ourselves, and because we knew why. And if they had sat around long enough, they probably would have molded because you've got organic matter in the coffee grounds and you've got moisture, and that's all you need to grow mold. So if you want to, it's fine if you use used coffee grounds. In fact, if you want your soap to turn dark, I only did this once. Was it use just grind up fresh coffee grounds and use that. And there's a lot of color in that, and that will turn your soap brown. However, if you use used coffee grounds, which I thought, why am I using fresh coffee grounds? It did not make the soap smell like coffee. So that was kind of like pointless. So I decided after that to just always use used coffee grounds, but it's just very important that they be dry. So we just dump the used coffee grounds on a plate, spread them out nice and thin, and let them sit there for a couple of days to make sure they are 100% dry. And then you do not want to use dried herbs unless you're fine, with it being kind of brown and looking like you've got little bugs in your soap or something like that. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to smell. So there's just really no point in putting dried herbs into the soap. Like I said, if somebody uses something like dried lavender buds, like people just put those on the top. Like as soon as you pour the soap into the mold, you just put those on the top. So they just sit on the top and they're stuck. So they'll be stuck to one edge of the bar when when it's sliced. Because putting them in there is not good. You don't ever want to use fresh flowers or fresh herbs because like that coffee that I used, there's too much moisture in that, and moisture plus organic matter turns into mold. So you don't want to have that. Let's see, there is another question. Oh, Marge says she sells faded scents as mildly scented. Yes, that is another possibility. And if you're in person, if you're selling like at a farmer's market or a craft fair, then you could definitely sell those to people, and there are people who would buy them. But a lot of because you put them in their own little separate section of mildly scented. But right now, the only two ways that we sell is at a grocery store and through the mail. And so the grocery store doesn't want to have a separate mildly scented thing. We've got the fragrances that they sell, and they need to be good and strong. And we put out just enough to keep them moving fast. So, and then the last thing I'm going to talk about are other food items that you might have considered or thought about and said, oh, could I add that to my soap? So I am going to mention milk here. We make all the soap we make is 100% goat milk soap. There's no water in it at all. 20% of every bar is goat milk. And if you're going to use milk, either goat milk, cow milk, sheep milk, whatever kind of milk you're using, you need to freeze it. And you need it. It doesn't have to be solid frozen when you use it. I freeze it in Ziploc bags. Like, I know ahead of time, I know that I need my, I need either 11 ounces or 22 ounces. And so I'm going to freeze them in Ziploc bags in those amounts, and I mark them with the weight on there. And then since it's flat when it freezes, the smaller ones can very easily be broken up. The larger one needs to melt just a little bit before I can break it up. And so once I can break it up into small pieces that are smaller, that's when I put it into my container and I add my lye to that. And the pH of the lye will cause it to melt. So this is why, like, lye is a big deal. It is scary stuff that has a lot of power in that pH. And so when you add it to frozen milk, it melts it. What happens if you just use milk out of the refrigerator? It's going to turn a very angry orange. And this is all, you get to see all of this in my soap making course, because my soap making course is got all these videos in there, every step of the soap making process. And you'll see in there, when you've got it, when you start with frozen milk, it's a really pretty pastel yellow color when you add lye to goat milk. But if that milk is slushy or too close to thawing, then it turns an angry orange. And what happens is your butter fat separates. And this is where people freak out, because the butter fat separates. And so you've got all these white floating globs in there. And people think, oh my gosh, that's lye. I can't get the lye mixed up. And so they just stir and stir and stir. And they think that they can't get the lye mixed up. Fat floats, lye sinks. So if you have undissolved lye, it's going to sink to the bottom of your container and be bright orange. Fat is white and it floats. So, if you've got this angry orange mixture with white stuff floating on it, it's because it got so hot. It caused the butter fat to separate. And so that's how you know the difference. It will make soap. Tomorrow night, I am talking about the importance of temperature. The problem with using anything that's too hot is that it's going to cause it to saponify faster, which is a little scary when you are a new soap maker. So it just makes it a little bit more challenging, but I'll talk about that more tomorrow night. So always make sure that you're using frozen milk. If you're making soap with milk, it does take some special instructions. A lot of people who just make it with water talk about putting your container in a water bath. And you don't need to do that if you're starting with frozen milk, because the milk is frozen. And so that keeps the lye from overheating the milk. And it's the reason it turns orange if it gets too hot is because it's basically the sugar in the milk is burning. It's getting scorched. Using honey can also be a challenge because of the sugar in there. It can cause things to heat up. So if you use honey, you would use a very small amount. I only did it once and I never tried again. So now that I'm talking about it, it's like, oh, I should try it again and see if I can get that perfected, because that could be fun. You can use beer. One of my students, her son had a brewery, and the whole reason she took my class is because she wanted to start making soap with her son's beer that he could sell at his brewery. And she did that, and it's been successful, and she's very happy with it. So you don't want to use something like a fruit puree. Like you wouldn't want to take a bunch of strawberries and put them in your blender and then throw them in there, because again, moisture plus organic matter equals mold. So it's not going to be pretty because it's going to be, like your strawberries are going to be so diluted and stuff. And it also could eventually lead to spoilage if your soap is sitting around long enough. So if you're working with honey, adding it at trace could be a little bit helpful, because otherwise it can lead to seizing too. So checking again for questions. I don't see any questions right now. So basically to wrap up tonight, just remember that just because something is natural and you can eat it doesn't mean that you can put it in your soap. Most likely because one of the biggest problems that you can wind up with is simply that it is going to wind up causing your soap to mold or add too much moisture to the soap, so it's not going to dry. So always make sure, unless you want to experiment and you're okay with having a wasted batch, always make sure that you are getting recipes and ideas from somebody who is an experienced soap maker. Because don't just find something online like I did with that, add comfrey to your soap to make it green. That was a long time ago. Like, there's a part of me that's like, I can't believe that you did that. Like, one person said something and you tried it. Because usually I'm like, oh, okay, let me see who else says this. Is this accurate? So you don't want to try something unless you're sure that there's not a problem with it. I think I see, is there a question? Mark says honey is water soluble. So are you saying that you add honey to the water before you add the lye, or I'm not sure. Could you explain more about how it applies? So I think that pretty much covers it for tonight. So I just dropped the links in the comments to sign up for the soap making course. Marge says that she mixes a small amount of water with the honey and then adds it to the goat milk. And so that's before you add the lye to it. Okay. All right. Cool. If you think of any questions later, feel free to come back and ask in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off for tonight and go eat my dinner. Hope you guys have a great night, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. The topic for tomorrow night is how temperature affects soap making and why you need to have a thermometer to be successful consistently. Bye for now.